Today, the good people of Line 6 have finally released their latest firmware for the Helix family. This is the floor, the LT, the rack, HX effects, the Stomp, and the Stomp XL. All their hardware units have this new update, which includes a few massive improvements specifically to the cabinet modeling system. We also have some new amp models and effect models that I'm going to go over in this video, and the whole point of this is just to be a quick summary so you know what you're looking at and what you might want to get started with first. If you're ready to update your unit, you definitely want to follow the step-by-step instructions that Line 6 has on their website. That link, again, it's down in the description. Follow that step-by-step, don't deviate from it, and it should be a flawless process. Basically, you're going to create a backup, save it somewhere safe and easy to get to. Then we're going to start the firmware update process. You'll open up HX Edit with your device attached, and you're going to download the latest version of HX Edit. If you have a problem with this, uninstall the current version that you have and go directly to the Line 6 website to reinstall 3.50 HX Edit. Once that's finished, you'll be able to actually update the firmware on your unit, on your Helix floor, LT, Stomp, whatever. These are actually two separate processes. So you start with HX Edit, then you do the device's firmware. Once that's finished, manually, you're going to want to do a factory reset. So it's going to erase all your settings. This is where the backup comes in handy. This is important just to make sure everything is working exactly as it should. You're going to trigger a factory reset, so power down the unit, and according to the website, again, you want to read exactly what they have written on their website and follow those steps. You'll hold a combination of foot switches as you power on the unit. That's going to remove all your presets and IRs, which is why it's important that we made that backup earlier. Once the factory reset is finished, the easiest thing to do is just go to File, Restore from Backup. You select the file, and boom, it's all there again. The update process for me took just about 30 minutes, which is what it described on the Line 6 website. We're finished, so now let's get into looking at some of the new models. Amp-wise, we have 5 new models. 3 of them are based off of a Sunn Model T. We have the normal channel, the bright channel, and then a jumped channel, just like you would do on a Marshall. And then we have 2 amp models that are based off of the Peavey Invective. To get into the effect pedals, Line 6 has released a new 4-voice chorus. So to describe this briefly, a chorus is typically one voice. We have the dry signal on its own that's then blended into the voice I'm talking about, the vibrato, the pitch affected signal. It sounds like a vibrato pedal does on its own. And to get a chorus effect, essentially what you do is you take that vibrato signal, usually it's delayed by a few milliseconds to make it sound a little bit more lush, and then we'll actually blend it in with the dry channel 50-50. That's the difference between a chorus and a vibrato effect. The vibrato effect in a chorus pedal is delayed a little bit and then blended with the dry signal to achieve that sound. With the new 4-voice chorus, we can actually have up to 4 vibrato like duplications of that signal. So it's just going to sound huge. Think like what the Boss Dimension chorus sounds like. We also have a brand new modulation that they've called the Flexovibe. Sounds like it might be something similar to a Univibe. I'm still waiting for my device to update. It's been going for about 15 minutes here, and I'm going to demo that in just a second. Line 6, just like they partnered with Sunn to recreate one of their iconic amplifiers, they've also partnered with Earthquaker devices by recreating the Plumes with the Helix software. And if you don't know, this is just simply Earthquaker's take on a tube screamer, so we now have a new tube screamer to choose from. We also have a recreation of the Earthquaker device's Life pedal, which was a collaboration they did with Sunn Amplification a few years back. It's essentially a combination distortion and octave down pedal. It has a boost on it as well, so we have 2 models from this. We have the Vitrol Distortion and also the Vitrol Boost. In addition to that, we have a standalone octave pedal that they've added. They've called it the Boctaver, the Boss OC2, the Boss Octaver copy. That's what it is. If you don't know of this pedal, it's one of those holy grail pedals. They're pretty expensive now. Years ago, I was lucky enough to find an original 86 OC2 at a pawn shop, and then like less than a year later, I found another one. I've passed both of those on to friends. I have an older OC3, and lately I got the OC5, so needless to say, I'm a huge fan of that design, and I'm excited to check this one out. We did have an older legacy effect model of kind of like the OC2 kind of sound. It sounds kind of dance clubby, if you know what I mean. Not a great, authentic, clean pitch shifter, but it has a vibe of its own, so it's going to be interesting to check out. And lastly, maybe most exciting of all, this is going to go along with the cab simulation stuff I'm going to talk about and demo in just a second. We have the Dynamic Ambience block, which, as you can imagine from the previous Dynamic Plate, Room, and Hall blocks that they had added, this one is just meant to create a sort of ambience, and this can be really useful, I'm imagining, for tuning in the sound of a guitar cabinet, and specifically helping to make it sound like there's actually an amp in the room with you. This could be very useful for headphone users. If you're practicing on headphones, I always like to say, you should have a separate patch for headphone practice versus actual live application, because the amplification mediums are entirely different. It doesn't make sense to use the same patch for that. But regardless, this is something that, along with the new cabinet software and the dual IR block, which I'll mention in a second, is just going to help the Helix to sound a lot more realistic, I think. With that said, this is related. I just wanted to briefly mention a page that I just finished building yesterday on my website. It's a detailed gear guide of all the popular accessories that I've personally used or have spent a lot of time researching that are meant to be used with the smaller HX Stomp and PodGo units that are really useful in greatly expanding the capabilities of these smaller units. Stuff like external foot switches, what works, what you might consider, options at different price points, small MIDI controllers, expression pedals, headphones that I think work well for at-home practice versus like general application, cheap in-ear monitors and stuff like that. So definitely go check that out if you're newish to the HX Stomp. Let's talk about the new IR software for a second. The major thing that has changed is that they now have a dual IR block. What this is essentially just what it sounds like. You can load 2 impulse responses in a single block. That's great. You can pan them left and right and have a stereo IR finally, or you can actually keep them dual mono, maybe for a more complex cabinet sound, or maybe you're doing some acoustic modeling and you're just really trying to nail the sound that you need. We'll take a look at that in just a second. To talk about the new cabinet software, this is the biggest part of the new update. Basically, they've reworked their entire impulse response like folder system. So instead of just having a single distance parameter where we can choose how far the mic is away from the speaker, which does affect the sound, of course, we can also change the point that the microphone is on the speaker. Is it on the dust cap in the center? Is it on the edge of the dust cap? Is it on the part of the speaker cone, or maybe all the way on the edge? We can also change the angle, either from a, directly on, or we could actually go to a 45-degree angle, which also changes the sound. Last year I put out a pretty detailed video on all these different techniques we can use to get a specific sound out of a guitar amp. It's basically guitar amp miking 101. So maybe save that link and watch it at a later date if you want specific examples of how all these adjustments affect the sound. Let's take a look at HX Edit. We're going to explore some of these new blocks. As we move through here, just know that I have, I think, over 80 Helix tutorials, Helix tip videos on my channel now, so maybe consider subscribing if this video has been helpful so far. And I also have a playlist. There'll be a link up here, if I remember to put it there, where you can find literally all of the Helix videos in one spot. You can kind of skim through and look for a question you've always wondered or something. And like always, if you have a question, feel free to leave it in the comments down below. All right, so I'm all plugged in. I'm finally behind HX Edit. I decided to go with my larger pedal board. I'm not going to need that for the next month or so. Typically, when these updates come out, there are a few bugs, and I've got a really stressful gig tomorrow, so I saved my XL for 3.51 when that comes out in a week or two. If you're someone that really needs a perfectly working Helix, I would advise maybe waiting just a week before you jump in here. But we're going to look at some of the new models. All right, so we're on HX Edit. I've got my blank preset here. I call it Bypass. I leave that in the first slot for a number of reasons. But I remembered that I had an open one down here. Pretty much everything else is taken, but I have a new preset down here. So let's start off with some of the amp models. First thing you should know is because we have all these new cabinet models, they wanted to create separate folders. So as you open up the amp and cab combo blocks, these are going to auto recall the new cabinet models. If you want to access the older models, you can just go here and go to Guitar plus Legacy Cab. And when you go to select the cab, these are the ones that we've known and we love and we've been using for ages. But for this video, obviously, I'm going to focus on the new stuff. So let's start with the Peavey Vitrol Crunch model. There it is. I feel like it could use a little bit more high-end, maybe through the presence control. And then this depth knob is going to control the low end, obviously, just like it sounds. Whole ton more low end as you pull that in. So probably for a rhythm tone, generic rhythm tone, I want to keep that kind of on the low side so we're not getting too much low end. Let's see how the bias controls work. They also kind of hollow it out a little bit. They changed the quality of distortion. I actually have a full video on using these advanced amp parameters here, so like sag, hum, ripple, bias, and bias X. They're subtle, but they can be really useful. So we have a ton of different controls here. We have a preamp gain and a post gain. Let's crank the preamp gain. We'll get rid of some of the post amp. And we'll do the reverse. Kind of a slightly tighter sound. Let's check out the lead channel. Same thing, I feel like it could use a little bit more presence, which is interesting because this is a relatively bright guitar with these Supertron pickups. This guitar I got a few months ago. I haven't really talked about it on the channel too much, but I actually bought it from Matthew Followill of Kings of Leon. So this is one of his guitars that he used on the Walls tour in like 2017, 16, and 17, I think that tour was. I was down at Carter's in Nashville over the summer and I played it, and since I left town I'd been thinking of it for a while, and maybe about a month later I just called and made an offer. So this is my guitar, and this has been the one I've been playing pretty much exclusively for the last few months. Let's get into looking at some of the other amp models. So we have 3 more here, which are from the Sunn amp here. So let's start with Moon Normal. Also pretty bassy sounding, huh? You should know I do have my large pedal board down there, but it's not running through anything. The Stomp is basically the first and last pedal in the chain, aside from that external tuner. And the effects loop, as you can see, is not on at all. So you're hearing into the Stomp, well, through the tuner, into the Stomp, out the Stomp, through my Pinstripe DISO, which is like a line isolator, direct box in stereo to my interface. Style this in a little bit. You can hear there's a lot of sub-frequencies with that. I really don't have hardly any bass dialed in at all, actually. But you can, especially if you have headphones, you're going to notice this. There's like this really low thumping frequency with each pick stroke that I have. Let's pull this up a little bit more. Onto the bright channel. I have a feeling I'm going to like this better. Yeah, already. Alright, don't want to spend too much time here. And then the jump model. Let's explore the cabinet model. So this is the new cabinet software now. Basically, we have the ability, instead of, like I mentioned earlier, instead of just changing the distance of the mic, we can change the position on the speaker cone and also the angle of the microphone. So we've got a 906, a Sennheiser 906, which is historically a pretty bright mic. Let's go to something maybe a little bit more neutral. Here's an SM7 that's kind of darker, I suppose. 421 would sound great on this type of amp. Let's start with the 57, why not? What I kind of like to do when I'm miking a guitar amp is I like to start exactly as you're seeing right here. So angle dead on 0 degrees. Let's get rid of the low cut and the high cuts entirely, because that should be built into the impulse response, honestly. But we'll explore that maybe. And I have the position here just right at the center of the desk cap. Again, distance just right up on it. And from here we can start tuning. So I'm going to leave the angle the same. Let's just back up a little bit like we have been able to do in the past. I already see that they've given us more variance in the distance. Before it was 1 inch, 1.5 inches, 2 inches, 2.5. Now we actually have 1/4 inches. So let's try like 250. It might come in a little bit. That sounds a little bit too much lacking in the low end. And now I'm going to slowly start moving this off the center of the dust cap. Can you hear it filtering? You start to lose that nice, crisp high end right around here. Depending on the sound you're going for, that might be a nice effect, or you might not want that. I think I like, especially with a pretty distorted sound, I like to try and keep it relatively bright sounding so it's still really defined, you know, the notes that I'm playing and stuff. And lastly, we'll try the angle. I actually like that it rolls off the low end a bit. Not a fan of that. I might go around 10. That's kind of the stock setting that I usually leave it at. Maybe bring up the low cut. It's not going to make much of a difference because the speaker itself is already not reproducing certain frequencies in that low register. You can hear not much of a difference. So there's kind of a stock sound maybe for that. Let's start messing with the new Dynamic Ambience. Can you hear how it adds a little bit of like a room echo to it? So we're on the 8-meter setting here. You can choose a slightly larger room size, and like I mentioned earlier, this is just to kind of help you get an idea of what the amp would sound like. I switched to the 12-meter setting, slightly larger room, and like I mentioned earlier, this is going to be a great tool, I think, for dialing in these digital amps and helping them sound a little bit more realistic, like there's an amp there in the room with you, especially if you're using headphones because you've got the speaker right against your ear. There is, no natural reflections happening in the room around you. Maybe let's go to 10, increase the pre-delay. I'm going to bring up the mix. That's a good idea for dialing in reverb so you can actually hear what you're doing. Damping is going to control the high-end roll-off. So this would be as if it were bypassed. We're getting plenty of high-end flutter and stuff. Starting to reel that in a little bit. Usually where all these controls come set up stock is usually a good idea. Yeah, I really don't like the super high-end reflections. Kind of sounds artificial. So I might roll somewhere around there. Diffusion is basically how the reflections interact with the other surfaces in the room. So you have the initial reflection of an impulse. That would be the initial repeat. And then that, it comes straight to you, but also it reflects and it bounces off other surfaces. The more diffusion, the more reflections there are. I think for this sort of application, I kind of like a lower setting. And then the shape control seems to be that we can choose between whether we want to favor and hear more of the early reflections or the later reflections, like I mentioned with diffusion. I'm probably going to edge on the early reflections. And if you want to get rid of any frequencies, you can do a more dramatic high cut with the high cut control here. And if we wanted to bypass it, we might want to leave trails on to make it sound a little bit more natural. This is such a short, reflection. I'm not sure it's going to have that much of an effect. Once we've dialed in the reverb, let's bring back the mix to reasonable control. I like to hear a little bit of it, but not too much. and this seems to be a pretty good setting. So let's stick with that and let's explore some of the effect models. Now we have the 4-voice chorus, which is, I'm always happy to get another modulation effect. I'm going to dial in one of the sounds I tend to like. Actually, let's go with a higher rate and a lower depth. Sometimes vice versa, the other effect is a good setting. Generally, if you have a high rate, you don't also want a high depth, because you end up sounding seasick like John Scofield, unless you want that sound. Like I mentioned, we have the mix control, which if you want to isolate the vibrato signal, can be a cool effect. But for a chorus sound, let's stick at 50%. So here's the sound you might want to go for. Let's dial in the voice control here. So we're at 2 voices right now. And 4. You can hear the more voices, the more kind of lush it sounds. We do have a new Flexovibe effect, where the warp control kind of it affects like the waveform of the modulation. So this is going to be a little bit more mild. And you can hear as we get to the higher end of it, it's basically taking it so it's going from the maximum setting to the minimum setting at a much faster rate than it was with the lower setting. Typically, I like this in front of overdrive, so I'm going to reorganize this. Sounds great. I love when they put effect models in and there's just, a few controls and it just sounds really good at basically any setting that you put it on. So now you have your choice. You have the Flexovibe or the ubiquitous vibe, the old Univibe sound. So to get into the distortion a little bit, this is going to pair really nicely with the amp models that are brand new here. Let's check out the pillars. Again, this is a tube screamer. So this is actually one of the preferred tube screamer settings if you're not kind of like well versed in this sort of effect. A lot of people, especially in front of a distorting amp, something that's already distorting, they'll use it as a boost pedal. They can boost the level a little bit, and they'll actually take the gain on the pedal plenty far down. What this pedal does naturally is it attenuates the low end, so that helps you kind of stick, to a much tighter sound, so it's not sounding so flubby. And of course, you can use the tone control for that as well. Yeah, so another great tube screamer we have here. We also have the Vital Distortion and the Vital Boost. The Vital Boost is very simple. And the distortion has all the parameters from the original pedal. And lastly, we'll check out the new Boctaver. If you don't know, this effect is naturally going to have a lot of artifacting. That's kind of part of the sound. That's actually why people like it. So the Boss OC2 is one that is going to glitch every now and then. It has a pretty unique kind of sound to it. And here's the setting that a lot of people like. They'll ride the octave 2 setting completely off, the dry level completely off, and then go maximum on the single octave down. This is kind of the stock setting. Typically, it's used a little bit more for bass guitar, so play higher up on the instrument, and you're just going to get a way different sound than you would have normally from a guitar. Their model seems to track pretty well, better than the normal OC2, but it still has that great sound. I think they did a really great job on a first look emulating this one. And lastly, let's check out the dual impulse response block. So I'm going to select, this is a favorite one. This is an amp model, obviously without a cabinet, and I'm going to pull in a custom IR I have. We're going to go up here, select dual. Now we have 2 IRs we can pick from. These impulse responses you're looking at, by the way, if you had bought my preset library in the past, these are a free edition. I captured my Mesa Boogie that you see behind me, which has a Celestion G12 Vintage 30 speaker in it, and I've been really digging these IRs just with a bunch of the microphones that I own, and I also have a version that I used Neumann U87 as a room mic. In my preset bundle, we have over 111 presets now. You can get the bass presets separately if you wanted to. It also includes a ton of acoustic impulse responses for mandolin, nylon string guitar, steel string acoustic guitar, ukuleles in there too, and then also the IR capture that I mentioned of my Mesa Boogie cabinet back there. Again, free updates for life, just one purchase, and you're good for all the updates going forward that I create. I've selected one of the IRs that it comes with in the IR-A slot, and one of the ones that I've made in the IR-B. Let's go maybe with the 421. So first things first, I can hear some phase issues, and we'll get into how to correct that. So the IR-A here, this is where we would affect the first impulse response that we loaded in. Maybe actually let's change that to a... yeah, let's go with the deluxe model. I pulled up a little bit of a low cut, and we've got the level control here just like before if we wanted to affect anything. I'm going to go to the IR-B, which is the one that I'd created. I'm going to do the same thing. And now I'm going to finally go to this both screen. So this is where we control the delay between either of these 2 cabinet impulses. So basically what happens, especially when you have a bunch of different third-party makers of impulse responses, my impulse response might have a different amount of latency than someone else's. So like where someone else's might have like 2.2 milliseconds, mine might have 2.4 milliseconds, and you can actually hear that in the cone filtering, especially if they're dual mono like this. So what you want to do once you pick up 2 IRs and blend them together, if you're hearing some phase issues, maybe a lack of low end or sounds like some middle frequencies are scooped out of it, take this delay knob. It's pretty hard to know which one is ahead of the other one, but just kind of sweep back and forth, and you're looking for the setting that both IRs sound as full as possible, and that's how you know that they're in phase. So by sliding back and forth, essentially, if we go to the left, we're delaying impulse response A by up to 50 milliseconds, which is more than you should ever need. And then as we go to the right, we can delay impulse response B relative to A by up to 50 milliseconds. So I'm hearing something around in this range is... It's hard to tell on headphones. I'll have to reference on speakers later. But that kind of sums up the new software in the Helix. I'm excited to get to know this stuff. So there it is, Helix 3.50. Hopefully this video, this rundown was useful to you as you wait for your Helix to update. Like I said, mine took nearly half an hour. So get started on that. If you're someone who needs a completely flawlessly operating Helix within the next 2 weeks, I would say maybe hold off on the 3.50 update until 3.51 comes out. It usually takes Line 6 about a week or two to get to that, and that update is just going to be thrown out to patch some common bugs that they've been hearing from the community. I was able to update my large pedal board here with the original Stomp on it because I don't think I'm going to be using that probably in the next month or so, so I feel pretty safe with that. Tomorrow I have one of the biggest gigs I've ever been hired to do. I'm playing with the Pittsburgh Symphony. I'm going to use the Stomp XL for that, so I'm really looking forward to that, and I'm keeping that on the older software just to be safe. It's going to be stressful as it is already. I don't want to have to deal with software not working or having to relearn a series of menu dives if I have to adjust something on the fly and I have to get it done quickly. So thanks for watching the video. I wanted to mention also that I have some free presets on my website. There's some paid stuff there as well, but try out the free ones if you're new to the Helix and let me know what you think. Take care, thanks for watching the video, and I'll see you in the next one.